The courtroom was never meant to feel like a stage, yet Adrian Carter made it one. From the moment he strode to the witness stand, he carried himself like a man rehearsing lines for an audience he believed adored him. The press leaned forward, their cameras flashing at every smirk, every dramatic pause. Elena sat across from him, her hands gently folded over her belly, her breath uneven as she braced for the storm she knew was coming. Adrian began slowly, his voice rich with mock sorrow. "Your Honor," he said, glancing at the judge before sweeping his gaze across the room, "I regret to admit that my marriage has been a mistake. I tried, but no man can carry the burden of a wife who betrays him." He looked directly at Elena, his eyes cold, his smirk cruel. Gasps rippled through the gallery. "That child," he continued, stabbing his finger in her direction, "is not mine. She disgraced me. She disgraced this court, and she disgraced Carter Enterprises." The words cut deeper than any knife. Elena's lips trembled, but she refused to look away. She had endured months of whispers, months of suspicion planted by Adrian's carefully orchestrated lies. Now he delivered the final blow in public, on record, with the world watching. His mistress Cassandra sat proudly in the gallery, crossing her legs with calculated elegance. She leaned back, basking in the humiliation unfolding before her. When Adrian paused for effect, she gave him a small nod of approval, like a queen rewarding her knight. The judge cleared her throat, irritation flickering in her eyes. "Mr. Carter, please keep your comments relevant to the case." But Adrian thrived on spectacle. "Relevant?" he sneered. "The truth is relevant. Why should I pay for a child that isn't mine? Why should I, one of the city's leading men, be dragged down by a liar who only married me for money?" His voice rose, booming through the chamber. Reporters scribbled furiously, headlines already forming. "Billionaire denounces pregnant wife." Elena's cheeks burned. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought the whole room could hear it. For a moment she felt small, invisible, a shadow of the woman she once was. Yet inside her, something stirred. A spark, a reminder that she was not alone. The tiny kicks beneath her ribs seemed to whisper, "Hold on, Mama." Lucas Hale, her lawyer, placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Breathe," he murmured. "It's almost time." Elena nodded faintly. She knew what he meant. She knew the evidence waiting in his briefcase would turn this entire spectacle into Adrian's undoing. But at that moment, the pain of betrayal overwhelmed her. She thought of the nights she had stayed awake waiting for Adrian to come home, the sacrifices she made to support him, the love she had poured into a man who now treated her like dirt beneath his shoes. The humiliation was complete when Adrian delivered his final line. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice calm, smug, absolute. "That child is not mine. And by the end of this trial, everyone will know the truth." He was right about one thing: everyone would know the truth. But not the one he imagined. Because within minutes, the very proof Adrian demanded would be placed in front of the judge, and it would destroy him. The words echoed in Elena's mind long after Adrian sat back down, smug and victorious. "That child is not mine." The sentence replayed like a cruel song, drowning out the muffled whispers of the courtroom. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The polished oak bench in front of her blurred, the lights above flickered, and the weight of humiliation pressed down on her chest like a stone. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, to the life she carried. She whispered silently, "I'm sorry, baby," as if she had failed her child by sitting there, powerless, while the man who was supposed to protect them both tore her apart in front of strangers. The ache was unbearable. The judge called for a recess, sensing the tension was spiraling. Elena rose shakily, escorted by Lucas to a quiet room down the hall. The cameras didn't follow her there, but the humiliation did. As soon as the door closed, she collapsed into the chair, tears streaming down her face, sobs racking her body. "How could he?" she whispered. "After everything, how could he?" Lucas crouched beside her, his voice calm but firm. "Elena, listen to me. He wants you broken. That's his weapon. But you have something stronger than his lies. You have proof. You need to hold on a little longer." But logic couldn't soothe the storm raging inside her. She thought of the nights Adrian had promised her forever, the morning he kissed her forehead when she showed him the first ultrasound, the fake joy in his eyes that she now realized was only performance. She thought of her parents, who raised her with such faith and love, and how ashamed they would be to see her like this, shattered, betrayed, and discarded like nothing. Her breathing quickened, almost panicked. "Maybe he's right," she whispered. "Maybe the world will believe him. He has money, power, the media. What do I have?" Lucas gripped her hands tightly. "You have the truth, and the truth is a weapon no empire can survive." Elena closed her eyes, tears still sliding down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him, but fear gnawed at her. What if the judge didn't accept the evidence? What if Adrian twisted it somehow? What if she lost her dignity, her child's future, everything? The door opened slightly, and a court officer poked his head in. "We're ready to resume." Elena wiped her tears quickly, but her eyes remained red, her body trembling. She forced herself to stand. Every step back to the courtroom felt like walking into a battlefield where she was hopelessly outnumbered. As she entered, the cameras clicked again, capturing her swollen belly, her tear-streaked face. Adrian's mistress smirked, whispering something in his ear that made him chuckle. The humiliation burned hotter. Elena lowered herself into her chair, her body heavy, her spirit fraying. For a fleeting moment she wanted to run, to leave everything behind and disappear. But then she felt it, the faint kick inside her womb, her baby reminding her she was not alone. She straightened her back, drew in a shaky breath, and fixed her eyes on the judge. She was still broken, still fragile, but somewhere deep inside a spark flickered. And that spark was about to ignite the fire that would consume Adrian's empire. The gavel struck twice, echoing through the courtroom like a warning bell. Everyone returned to their seats, the whispers fading into an expectant hush. Elena sat with her head held slightly higher now, her tear-stained face softened by a quiet resolve. Adrian, however, lounged back in his chair, fingers drumming on the table, convinced victory was already his. Lucas Hale, Elena's lawyer, rose. His calm voice cut through the tense silence. "Your Honor, before this court considers my client's fate, there is critical evidence we must present. Evidence that speaks not only to her dignity, but also to the truth of paternity." The judge adjusted her glasses. "Proceed, Mr. Hale." From his leather briefcase, Lucas withdrew a sealed envelope, stamped with the insignia of the state's most trusted medical laboratory. He handed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to the bench. Murmurs rippled across the courtroom like a wave. Adrian's smirk faltered, though only for a moment. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering, "It's nothing. She wouldn't dare." The judge unfolded the document, her eyes scanning the lines. The silence grew unbearable. Reporters clutched their pens, ready for the revelation. Cassandra, Adrian's mistress, shifted uneasily in her seat, her confidence beginning to crack. Finally, the judge spoke. "This document is a legally certified DNA test, conducted under court-approved conditions. It establishes with 100% certainty that the unborn child of Mrs. Elena Carter is biologically the son of Mr. Adrian Carter." The words detonated like an explosion. Gasps filled the chamber. Cameras flashed wildly. Adrian's face drained of color, his arrogance evaporating into shock. He stood abruptly, slamming his palms against the table. "That's impossible. I destroyed." He stopped himself, realizing too late what he had nearly admitted. Lucas seized the moment. "Your Honor, for months my client has endured slander, humiliation, and betrayal. She's been called a liar, accused of infidelity, and ridiculed before the public. Today, the truth stands undeniable. The child is his. The empire Mr. Carter built on lies now faces the one thing he cannot silence: evidence." Elena felt her breath hitch, a mix of relief and vindication flooding her chest. For the first time in months, she looked at Adrian not with fear, but with quiet triumph. She placed her hand on her belly and whispered softly, "We did it." The press erupted outside the courtroom, rushing to relay the breaking news. DNA test proves Billionaire lied. Stock tickers began flashing, investors panicked, and the Carter Enterprises board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The foundation Adrian thought unshakable was crumbling in real time. Adrian's mistress leaned away from him, her face pale. The man she believed untouchable was unraveling before the world, and she wanted no part of his downfall. The judge raised her gavel. "Order. Order in this court." But order was already gone. The tide had turned, and there was no stopping it. For in the span of a single document, Adrian Carter's empire had begun to collapse, and Elena's truth had finally risen to the light. The morning after the DNA revelation, the world looked different. Headlines screamed from every newspaper stand. Billionaire lied about his pregnant wife. Stock analysts on television speculated about the sudden collapse of Carter Enterprises. Social media was ablaze with outrage, sympathy, and disbelief. For once, Elena's name was not whispered in pity, but spoken with admiration. Elena, however, awoke in her modest apartment with swollen eyes and a heart still fragile from months of pain. She sat at the edge of her bed, hands resting on her belly, staring at the sunlight pouring through the curtains. It felt like the first real light she had seen in ages. For so long, she had been defined by Adrian's shadow, his wealth, his betrayal, his lies. Now, the world finally saw her truth. But she knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. Lucas arrived later that day with fresh documents. "Elena," he said firmly, "you're no longer the victim. You're the woman who exposed him. People see you differently now. This is your moment if you're ready." At first, she hesitated. She had lived months in humiliation, drowning in fear. Could she truly rise now, in the public eye, carrying not only her child but also the weight of scandal? She thought of her parents, her students who once called her Miss Carter with pride, and the little life moving inside her. Strength pulsed through her veins. Elena stood, walked to the mirror, and saw not the broken woman from court but someone new. She brushed her hair back, applied light makeup, and slipped into a cream-colored dress Lucas had brought her. Simple, elegant, powerful. She no longer looked like the quiet schoolteacher begging for dignity. She looked like a woman ready to reclaim her narrative. That afternoon, Elena made her first public statement. Cameras crowded the entrance of the courthouse as she appeared, calm and radiant. The navy dress from court was gone, replaced by the flowing cream gown that highlighted her pregnancy like a badge of honor, not a burden. Microphones thrust toward her as reporters shouted questions. She paused, her voice steady. "For months I have been silent while lies were told about me and my child. Yesterday the truth was revealed. My baby is not a scandal, it is a blessing, and I will fight for his future with everything I have." The crowd erupted in applause. The image of Elena standing strong, her hands protectively on her belly, became the defining photograph of the scandal. That picture spread across newspapers, television screens, and social media feeds, painting her not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience. Adrian watched from his penthouse, rage boiling. His empire trembled as investors pulled away, and yet the woman he tried to destroy had never looked stronger. Elena returned home that evening exhausted but uplifted. She knew battles still lay ahead, but something had changed within her. The shame was gone. The fear was gone. What remained was power, the kind born from survival. And with that power, Elena was ready to face Adrian not as his discarded wife, but as the woman who would end his reign. The city had been buzzing for days. Every news anchor, every gossip column, every late-night host had one subject: Adrian Carter's disgrace. Yet the real storm came when the annual Bright Futures Gala arrived, an event that Adrian had once dominated. The same gala, where he had paraded Cassandra like a trophy, was now about to become the scene of his ultimate undoing. Elena had not planned to attend at first. The thought of walking into the lion's den, surrounded by Adrian's former allies, investors, and critics, terrified her. But Lucas was insistent. "Elena," he said, looking her in the eyes, "this is not just about clearing your name anymore. It's about taking back everything he tried to steal from you. Your dignity, your voice, your future. You don't hide. You walk in there and show them who you are." So she did. The night of the gala, the Crystal Renaissance Hotel sparkled under chandeliers and golden light. Guests in gowns and tuxedos whispered behind champagne glasses, eager for drama. When Adrian arrived with Cassandra on his arm, he forced a smile, but everyone could see the tension in his clenched jaw. His empire was crumbling, and tonight, every eye was watching for cracks. Then the room fell silent. Elena stepped through the grand doors, wearing a flowing sapphire gown that shimmered beneath the lights. Her pregnancy was visible, but instead of hiding it, she carried herself with grace, one hand resting proudly on her belly. Beside her stood Lucas, not just as her lawyer, but as her protector. The cameras clicked furiously. In an instant, Elena shifted from the woman humiliated in court to the radiant mother-to-be who had defied betrayal. Adrian's face paled. He hadn't expected her to come. Cassandra tightened her grip on his arm, whispering, "Ignore her. She's nothing." But the whispers in the room told another story. That's her. The wife he lied about. She looks stronger than ever. The host of the gala approached Elena, offering her the microphone. She hesitated, then took it, her voice calm but resolute. This evening is about the future of children, the future of families, the future of integrity. Some men believe money gives them the right to destroy lives. But money cannot erase truth. Money cannot silence a mother's love. Gasps echoed as her words struck home. Adrian shifted uncomfortably, his facade crumbling. Then, as if scripted by fate, one of Carter Enterprises' former board members stood up. Mrs. Carter, you have more integrity in your words tonight than Mr. Carter has shown in years. If you are willing, the foundation we once entrusted to him, we would now like to entrust to you. The applause was thunderous. Cameras captured Adrian's humiliation in real time, his mistress shrinking beside him. His empire had already been shaken by the DNA test, but now his reputation was shattered in public. He was no longer the king of the room. Elena was. As she stepped off the stage, she caught Adrian's eye. No words were spoken, but the message was clear. The man who had once humiliated her now stood defeated before the very society he had tried to impress. And this was only the beginning of his fall, because Adrian Carter still had further to lose. The weeks that followed the gala sealed Adrian Carter's fate. His name, once synonymous with power, became shorthand for betrayal and disgrace. Newspapers reported the collapse of Carter Enterprises as investors fled. The board forced Adrian to resign, citing irreparable damage to the company's reputation. Lawsuits piled up. Former partners, employees, and even government regulators lined up to investigate the empire he had built on greed and lies. The man who had humiliated his pregnant wife in court was now humiliated before the entire world. Cassandra, the mistress who had once clung to his arm like a prize, disappeared overnight. She was photographed boarding a flight to Europe with a new benefactor, leaving Adrian alone in his crumbling penthouse. His calls went unanswered. His friends evaporated. For the first time in years, Adrian Carter had no audience, no allies, and no empire. He had become the very thing he feared most, irrelevant. Elena, on the other hand, transformed. Her story of survival and truth spread far beyond the courtroom. Women wrote letters, thanking her for standing tall when the world tried to break her. She became a voice for dignity and resilience, invited to speak at events she never imagined attending. But through it all, she stayed grounded. She was not chasing fame or power. She was simply a mother preparing to welcome her child into a world she had fought to make safer. The day her son was born was quiet, tender, and healing. In a small hospital room with sunlight streaming through the blinds, Elena cradled the tiny boy in her arms. She named him Gabriel. God is my strength. Lucas stood at the door, smiling proudly, as her parents wept with joy beside her bed. For the first time in a long time, Elena felt whole. As she rocked her newborn, she whispered, "You are not a scandal. You are my miracle, and you will grow up knowing that truth and love always win." Outside, reporters waited for a glimpse, but Elena didn't rush to the cameras. This moment was hers alone. She had proven her strength to the world, but now her only duty was to her child. Meanwhile, Adrian watched the news from his empty penthouse. He saw the image of Elena leaving the hospital, glowing with pride, her baby in her arms. The same media that once worshipped him now celebrated her. He realized too late that the woman he had tried to destroy had risen from the ashes stronger than he ever imagined. Justice had been served, not just in the courtroom but in life itself. And as Elena stepped into her new future, she carried not bitterness, but hope. She had lost everything once, but gained something far greater: freedom, dignity, and the unbreakable bond with her son. Her story became more than a scandal. It became a reminder to every woman watching that no betrayal, no humiliation, no man could ever erase the strength of a mother's love. The silence in Adrian Carter's penthouse was deafening. For years, the space had been filled with the noise of parties, investors' laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the seductive whispers of women who flocked to his wealth. Now, it was hollow. The marble floors echoed his footsteps. The chandeliers gleamed over empty rooms, and the once proud billionaire sat alone, staring at the city that no longer admired him. His phone buzzed occasionally, but the messages were not from allies. They were demands from creditors, legal summons, and rejection after rejection. Former friends had cut ties, terrified of being dragged down with him. Board members who once bowed to his power now turned their backs, claiming ignorance of his lies. Even the tabloids, which once glorified his every move, now feasted on his downfall. Adrian tried reaching out to Cassandra, the mistress who had been his companion through the height of his arrogance. But she had already vanished, her social media filled with photographs from Paris, smiling on the arm of another wealthy man. The betrayal stung, not because he loved her, but because she left him exactly the way he had once left Elena, discarded without mercy. As days passed, Adrian's rage turned inward. He replayed the courtroom scene in his head. The moment the DNA test was revealed, the gasps, the flash of cameras, Elena's quiet triumph. He slammed his fists against his desk, shouting, "She ruined me." Yet deep inside, he knew the truth. He had ruined himself. His empire collapsed not because of Elena's strength, but because of his lies, his greed, his arrogance. The irony cut deep. The man who once stood untouchable, who believed himself a king among men, was now a prisoner of his own downfall. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows mocked him. Tired eyes, lines etched from stress, a hollow shell of the man who once demanded the world's respect. Meanwhile, Elena's face appeared everywhere. Magazine covers, news interviews, community events. She wasn't just the pregnant wife anymore. She was the symbol of truth, the woman who had stood tall when the odds were against her. Adrian threw a glass at the television one evening, the screen shattering, but her image remained burned into his mind. The loneliness gnawed at him. No lawyers could save him now. No investors would answer his calls. Even his own family, embarrassed by the scandal, distanced themselves. The walls of his penthouse felt like a cage closing in. For the first time in his life, Adrian Carter was powerless. And the cruelest part? He knew the world was only watching the beginning of his descent. Because his isolation was not the end. It was the doorway to a punishment even greater than loneliness. Cassandra had always been quick to sense when the tide was turning. She wasn't with Adrian Carter out of love. Love had nothing to do with it. She wanted power, wealth, and the shine of being seen on the arm of one of the richest men in the country. But when the DNA test shattered his empire and the world turned against him, Cassandra knew her golden ticket had expired. At first, she tried to stay. After all, she enjoyed the penthouse parties, the luxury handbags, and the attention. But the calls from designers stopped, invitations to galas vanished, and photographers no longer cared about her. Instead of glamour, she was met with sneers. "There's the woman who laughed while he humiliated his wife," one socialite whispered as Cassandra walked into a boutique. The sting of public shame was worse than she expected. Her loyalty crumbled quickly. Within days, she packed her belongings into designer suitcases, each gift Adrian had lavished on her now reduced to a survival kit. When Adrian confronted her, his voice hoarse from shouting, his eyes bloodshot, she didn't flinch. "You said you loved me," he growled, blocking the doorway. Cassandra laughed coldly. "Love? Adrian, I loved what you gave me, but now you have nothing. Why should I stay?" Her words sliced through him like glass. He lunged toward her, but she stepped back, calm and calculating. "Do you think I'll go down with you? No. I've already spoken to reporters. I told them everything." Adrian froze. "Everything?" "Yes," she smirked, tossing her hair. "Your late-night schemes, your manipulation of board members, even the offshore accounts you thought no one knew about. They'll paint me as another victim of your lies. And you know what? The world will believe it. Because they want someone to hate, and right now that someone is you." Adrian's knees weakened. For years he thought he controlled Cassandra, just as he controlled everyone else. But now she was free, slipping through his fingers like sand. She turned, wheeled her suitcase to the elevator, and left without a backward glance. The next morning, her face appeared on the front page of a leading magazine. The headline read, "Mistress Speaks Out. I was used and betrayed by Adrian Carter." She wore a black dress, her makeup soft and sorrowful, playing the role of the wronged woman. Public sympathy, once non-existent, began to tilt toward her. Adrian slammed the magazine against the wall, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. His mistress had not only abandoned him, she had joined the chorus tearing him apart. Now Adrian faced his ruin completely alone. And yet the storm Cassandra unleashed was only the beginning of the reckoning still to come. In the gleaming glass towers of Carter Enterprises, the mood was grim. Once a powerhouse in the world of real estate and finance, the company now teetered on the edge of collapse. Stock prices plummeted daily. Investors pulled out millions. What had taken Adrian Carter years to build was unraveling in weeks. But the greatest blow came not from outsiders, it came from within. The board of directors had tolerated Adrian's arrogance for years. They admired his ability to charm investors and bully competitors. But now he was toxic. Every headline dragged their company deeper into scandal. And worse, Cassandra's tell-all interviews revealed damning details of financial misconduct. Offshore accounts, secret deals, and manipulation of stock prices, all tied directly to Adrian. A private meeting was called at the firm's headquarters. 12 board members sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces hard and voices clipped. "Gentlemen," said the chairman, Arthur Langley, "we can no longer afford loyalty to a man who has destroyed this company's reputation." Another member leaned forward. "The DNA test humiliated him, but what Cassandra revealed, that's criminal. If we don't act now, regulators will come after all of us." The decision was swift. Adrian would be forced out, stripped of his position, and left to face the consequences alone. It wasn't morality that guided them, it was survival. That afternoon, Adrian stormed into the boardroom, his once commanding presence reduced to desperation. "You can't do this to me," he barked. "This company exists because of me. You think you can run it without me? You're nothing without Adrian Carter." Arthur's expression was calm, almost pitying. "No, Adrian, you're nothing without us. You built an empire on lies, and now those lies are coming for you. We're handing over everything to federal investigators. Every hidden account, every forged signature, every scheme." Adrian's face drained of color. "You wouldn't dare." "We already have," Arthur replied coldly. "By tomorrow morning, federal agents will be knocking at your door." The room fell silent. For years, Adrian had been untouchable, the man who dictated the fate of everyone around him. Now he stood powerless, watching as the very people who once praised him sealed his downfall. When he left the building, reporters swarmed, shoving microphones in his face. "Mr. Carter, is it true the board has turned over evidence of fraud? Will you be indicted?" His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Cameras captured his silence, and silence was louder than denial. Back in the boardroom, Arthur exhaled heavily. "Gentlemen, Carter Enterprises will survive, but only if we cut out the cancer. Adrian is finished." Adrian's empire, once feared, was now being dismantled piece by piece, by the very men who had once cheered him on. And as the law closed in, Adrian would learn that betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those you thought were on your side. Adrian Carter had always believed he could outthink disaster. For decades, his life had been a series of calculated risks, bold moves, and last-minute victories. But now, every path he tried seemed to collapse beneath him. The morning after the board's betrayal, Adrian sat in his penthouse office with papers scattered across the floor. Contracts, bank statements, half-burned letters from secret accounts. It was all there, evidence of a man clawing for survival. He called lawyers, but none would take his case. "Too risky," they said. He called investors, but their phones went straight to voicemail. Even his personal assistant, loyal for nearly 10 years, had resigned with a single email. "I cannot be associated with your actions any longer." Adrian's desperation turned frantic. He spent hours on the phone with foreign banks, trying to transfer what money he could before accounts were frozen. But every attempt was blocked. Regulators had already moved in, and one by one his financial lifelines were cut. That night, he paced the marble floor of his penthouse, sweat beading on his forehead. "Think, Adrian," he muttered to himself. "There's always a way out." But the truth gnawed at him. For the first time in his life, there wasn't. In a last-ditch effort, he tried reaching Cassandra. He left voicemail after voicemail, his voice growing more desperate each time. "Cassandra, you can't do this to me. We were a team. I gave you everything. Just come back. We can fix this." But her phone stayed silent. He turned on the television only to see her face in another interview, painting herself as the victim. "He used me," she told the cameras, crocodile tears rolling down her cheeks. "I was blinded by his promises. I didn't know the truth until it was too late." Adrian threw the remote across the room, shattering the screen. "Liar," he screamed, but the echo in the empty apartment reminded him that no one cared. As the days dragged on, his desperation deepened. He arrived uninvited at the offices of old allies, pounding on doors, demanding meetings. Security escorted him out each time. Once, a photographer snapped a picture of him being dragged from the lobby of a hotel. The photo went viral, captioned, "From king to beggar." His greatest humiliation came when he tried to call Alina. Late one evening, drunk and slurring, he dialed her number. "Alina," he pleaded when she answered, her voice cautious, "you have to help me. You know me better than anyone. Tell them it's not true. Tell them I'm not the monster they think I am." Alina's reply was calm, steady, and final. "Adrian, you made your choices, and now you're living with them. I will never save you from yourself again." Then she hung up. For the first time, Adrian felt a weight heavier than greed or rage. He felt despair. The walls of his empire had crumbled, and the only sound left was the echo of his own downfall. But Adrian had not yet hit rock bottom, because the law was coming, and it would strip away even the little he had left. The knock came at dawn. It wasn't the polite tap of a visitor, but the pounding force of authority. Adrian Carter stumbled from his bed, still in yesterday's suit, the smell of whiskey clinging to him. When he opened the door, the sight that greeted him stole the last shred of his confidence. Federal agents, badges raised, eyes hard. Behind them, camera crews lined the street, capturing every second. "Adrian Carter," one agent announced, "you are under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. You are required to come with us." Adrian tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "This is ridiculous. I built this city. You wouldn't even have jobs if it weren't for me." But the agents didn't flinch. They stepped inside, presenting a search warrant, and began combing through his penthouse. As boxes of documents were hauled away, reporters outside shouted questions. "Mr. Carter, how long have you been hiding offshore accounts? What do you say about the mistress's accusations? Do you have anything to say to your wife and unborn child?" Adrian shoved past them, escorted into a waiting black SUV. The flash of cameras burned into his eyes like fire. At the federal courthouse, he was booked and questioned. For hours, investigators laid out their evidence. Falsified contracts, hidden accounts, bribes disguised as consulting fees. Each page was a nail in his coffin. Adrian shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his bravado fading with every document placed before him. "This is a witch hunt," he muttered, but his words sounded hollow, even to himself. Meanwhile, the news spread like wildfire. Stock tickers flashed his downfall, talk shows dissected his crimes, and the public that once envied him now mocked him. Headlines read, "From billionaire to criminal, Adrian Carter faces justice." Back in her modest apartment, Elena watched the coverage quietly, her newborn resting in her arms. She felt no triumph, only relief. Justice was moving, and it no longer depended on her strength alone. She kissed her son's forehead and whispered, "He can't hurt us anymore." For Adrian, the humiliation only deepened. He was forced to post bail using the last of his frozen assets, a far cry from the limitless wealth he once flaunted. Former friends testified against him, investors turned state's evidence, and Cassandra's interviews fueled the prosecutor's case. Each day, he walked into court surrounded by cameras, no longer the admired tycoon but a disgraced man fighting for scraps of dignity. He tried to straighten his suit, to lift his chin, but the jeers from the crowd outside reminded him of the truth. He was finished. At night, in his empty penthouse stripped of files and computers, Adrian sat alone, replaying the words that had started it all. "That child is not mine." A single lie, spoken in arrogance, had exposed every secret he thought was buried. And now, with the law closing in, Adrian Carter was about to discover that prison walls are the harshest mirrors of all. Elena sat by the window of her modest apartment, rocking Gabriel gently in her arms. The morning sun painted her face in warm light, a stark contrast to the cold shadows she had once lived under. For months she had been defined by humiliation, whispered about as the billionaire's discarded wife. Now, when she walked down the street, strangers stopped to thank her for her courage. Her story had traveled far beyond New York, reaching women in small towns, crowded cities, and quiet suburbs who saw themselves in her fight. At first, Elena resisted the attention. She had never wanted the spotlight, never cared for luxury or fame. But as letters poured in, women sharing their own stories of betrayal, mothers confessing how her strength inspired them, Elena realized her voice carried weight. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was leading. Lucas encouraged her to embrace it. "You don't have to stand on the sidelines anymore," he told her one evening. "You've already proven you can fight Adrian. Now you can help others fight their own battles." So Elena agreed to her first televised interview. Sitting on a simple set holding her son close, she spoke not about revenge, but about resilience. "What I've learned," she said softly, "is that no amount of money or power can silence the truth, and no betrayal can erase the strength of a mother protecting her child." The clip went viral within hours. Soon, invitations poured in, from women's conferences, charities, even universities. Elena used each platform to share her journey, but always with humility. She didn't present herself as a celebrity. She spoke as a woman who had once been broken and rebuilt herself, piece by piece. Financially, she was stable too. The court, recognizing Adrian's misconduct, granted her significant compensation and secured Gabriel's future. But Elena never flaunted it. She chose to remain in her modest home, donating much of her settlement to organizations that supported single mothers and victims of abuse. Her parents watched proudly, often reminding her of the values they had instilled long ago: kindness, dignity, strength. For them, she was still their daughter, the girl who once dreamed of a simple life. For the world, she had become something greater, a symbol. Meanwhile, Adrian's downfall continued, and the contrast only magnified Elena's rise. Where he grew weaker, she grew stronger. Where he faced jeers, she received applause. Where he was defined by lies, she was defined by truth. One evening, as she stood on stage at a women's empowerment event, applause thundering around her, Elena held Gabriel against her heart and smiled. She had once been humiliated in front of the world, but now the same world stood to honor her. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of the life she was meant to live. Free, strong, and unbreakable. Adrian Carter had once believed rock bottom was a place he'd never reach. He imagined it belonged to other men, the careless, the weak, the unlucky. But as winter settled over New York, Adrian discovered that rock bottom wasn't a single blow. It was a slow descent, a stripping away of everything he once used to define himself. The penthouse that had once hosted glittering parties now sat in silence, most of its luxury items seized by investigators. Expensive art was gone from the walls, cars repossessed, accounts frozen. Even the staff who once rushed to serve him vanished, leaving him to cook his own meals, or rather, stumble through takeout boxes scattered across the counter. But the emptiness inside the penthouse was nothing compared to the emptiness inside Adrian. Each morning, tabloids splashed new stories about him. Carter Empire in ruins. Mistress testifies against billionaire. His name, once respected, was now a punchline. The same people who had once lined up to shake his hand now crossed the street to avoid him. Desperation pushed him to old habits. He tried calling former allies, begging for help. "Just a loan," he pleaded. "I can fix this. I just need time." But phones clicked silent, and doors slammed in his face. The network of power he had built so carefully dissolved overnight. He was no longer Adrian Carter, the visionary. He was Adrian Carter, the disgraced criminal. The final humiliation came when he was evicted from his penthouse. Cameras lined the streets as movers hauled out what little remained of his belongings. A once proud billionaire, reduced to a man clutching 2 suitcases, shoving past reporters shouting, "Mr. Carter, where will you go now?" He had no answer. For weeks he drifted between cheap hotels, his suits wrinkled, his hair unkempt. The arrogance that had once fueled him was gone, replaced by a hollow stare. Nights were the worst. Alone in dim rooms, he replayed the courtroom humiliation, the DNA test, Elena's steady gaze as truth destroyed him. He drowned himself in whiskey, but the memories never faded. He thought of Cassandra, now thriving in Europe with a new benefactor. He thought of the board, testifying against him to save themselves. And worst of all, he thought of Elena, standing strong, her son in her arms, admired by the world. She had risen while he had fallen. That irony cut deeper than any betrayal. One night, Adrian sat on the edge of a motel bed, staring at his reflection in a cracked mirror. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling. "Who are you?" he whispered. The man staring back was unrecognizable. Not a billionaire, not a husband, not a leader, just a man destroyed by his own lies. And though he believed he had hit the bottom, Adrian had yet to face the harshest punishment, the judgment of the court and the prison walls that awaited him. The courthouse was packed once again, but this time the atmosphere was different. Months earlier, Adrian Carter had strutted through these very halls like a king, certain of victory. Now he shuffled in wearing a plain gray suit that hung loosely on his frame, his once polished shoes scuffed and worn. The swagger was gone. The cameras still flashed, but they no longer glorified him. They documented his ruin. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation. Reporters filled every bench, their pens ready to record the downfall of a man who had once been untouchable. Investors and former employees sat among the crowd, eager to witness justice. At the front of the courtroom, prosecutors prepared their final arguments, stacks of evidence piled high. Adrian's legal team was a shadow of what it once had been. Junior attorneys assigned by the court, not the high-powered defenders he used to command. The judge entered, stern and unyielding. This court will now hear closing statements in the case of the state versus Adrian Carter. The lead prosecutor rose, her voice clear and steady. Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. Mr. Carter defrauded investors, manipulated markets, and laundered millions through offshore accounts. He betrayed not only his shareholders, but the public trust. For years he believed himself above the law, but today the law stands above him. She pointed to the exhibits, contracts forged in his handwriting, testimony from Cassandra, financial records supplied by the very board he once controlled. Piece by piece, they painted a portrait of greed and corruption. Adrian sat motionless, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the table. The arrogance that once fueled him had been stripped away. Yet when his turn came, he stood and tried to summon his old voice. I built this company, he said, his tone uneven. I gave jobs to thousands, created wealth for this city. Yes, I made mistakes, but I don't deserve this witch hunt. You all benefited from me, and now you're ready to bury me. His words fell flat. The jury's faces were unmoved. The audience murmured with disdain. When the judge called for recess, Elena entered quietly through the side door. She didn't come to gloat. She came because she needed closure. She sat in the back, holding Gabriel, now a few months old. Her presence drew whispers, but she ignored them. Her eyes stayed on Adrian, not with hate, but with finality. When court resumed, the judge delivered her verdict. Adrian Carter, based on the evidence presented, this court finds you guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. You are hereby sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The gavel struck, and the sound reverberated through the chamber like thunder. Reporters rushed out to broadcast the news. Adrian slumped into his chair, pale and defeated. For the first time, the man who had once controlled everything had no future left to control. Elena rose quietly, kissed Gabriel's forehead, and walked out into the sunlight. Justice had spoken. And though Adrian's story ended in chains, Elena's was only beginning, free, strong, and unbroken. For Elena, the day of Adrian's sentencing closed one chapter of her life, but the journey toward healing had only begun. She returned home with Gabriel in her arms, the weight of years of betrayal slowly lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe freely. The courtroom's echoes of humiliation, the flashing cameras, the endless whispers, all of it began to fade. Her apartment, though modest, was filled with warmth. Flowers sent by strangers lined the windowsills, letters of encouragement piled high on the table. Each one reminded her that her struggle had not been in vain. She had stood her ground, not only for herself, but for every woman who had ever been silenced by power. Yet true catharsis came not from the world's praise, but from the quiet moments with her son. Late at night, when Gabriel stirred, Elena would rock him gently and whisper, "We're safe now. No one can hurt us anymore." The sound of his tiny breaths became her lullaby, a promise of a future untarnished by Adrian's shadow. One evening, as the city lights twinkled outside her window, Elena sat with her parents and Lucas around the dinner table. For months, meals had been filled with tension and fear. But now, laughter returned. Her father held Gabriel proudly, calling him the family's little warrior. Her mother stroked Elena's hair, saying, "You are stronger than you'll ever know." Lucas, who had fought tirelessly by her side, raised a glass of water. To truth, to resilience, and to new beginnings. Tears filled Alina's eyes, but this time they were not from pain, they were from gratitude. She realized that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about transforming it into strength. Adrian had taken so much from her, but in losing him, she had found herself again. In the weeks that followed, Alina embraced a quieter life. She continued speaking at events, but balanced it with simple joys: walks in the park, bedtime stories, Sunday dinners with her parents. The world still saw her as a symbol of resilience, but to Gabriel, she was just Mama, the safest place in the world. One afternoon, she walked past the courthouse where her nightmare had begun. She paused, staring at the stone steps. For a moment, the memories surged: the humiliation, the accusations, the tears. But then she smiled. That place had not broken her, it had forged her. Elena whispered to herself, "You didn't win, Adrian. You never could." With that, she turned away, holding Gabriel close, the sun warming her face. Her wounds had healed into scars, and those scars no longer defined her, they empowered her. For Alina, closure had finally come, and with it, the freedom to begin again. Spring arrived in New York, and with it came a sense of renewal that mirrored Alina's own life. The chill of winter, the season of trials, humiliation, and betrayal, had finally given way to warmth. Trees bloomed along the sidewalks, children played in the parks, and for Alina, every sunrise felt like a promise that the darkness was behind her. Gabriel had grown into a chubby-cheeked infant, full of laughter that filled their small apartment with joy. Each giggle, each tiny grasp of her finger, reminded Alina that the future was no longer chained to Adrian's empire. Instead, it belonged to her and her son. She spent her mornings walking him through the park, sunlight glinting off the stroller, strangers smiling warmly as they recognized her. No longer the humiliated wife, she was the woman who had fought for truth. And won. Elena's career also took a new path. Though she no longer taught full-time, she began mentoring young teachers, speaking at schools about resilience, honesty, and the power of standing up for what's right. Invitations continued to arrive, but she chose carefully, never letting fame swallow her. She understood now that strength meant balance. She would use her voice to inspire, but her heart would remain anchored in the simple love she had always craved. Lucas remained a steady presence. He visited often, helping with Gabriel, sharing meals with her parents, and standing by her side during events. Though Elena wasn't ready to open her heart again, she felt a quiet comfort in his loyalty. There was no rush. Life had already taught her the cost of illusions. This time she would choose carefully, if at all. One evening, Elena stood on the balcony of her apartment, Gabriel asleep in his crib behind her. She gazed at the skyline, once dominated in her mind by Adrian's towering empire. Now those glass towers were nothing more than buildings. The real empire, she realized, was the one she was building, an empire of truth, love, and resilience. Adrian, far away in a prison cell, no longer haunted her thoughts. He had become part of the past, a cautionary tale of greed and arrogance. She did not wish him well, nor did she wish him harm. She simply let him go, like smoke disappearing into the sky. As the night air wrapped around her, Alina whispered to herself, "We survived. We're free." Her eyes lifted to the horizon, where the first stars appeared. The city was alive, and so was she, reborn, stronger than ever, with a future wide open before her. For Alina Carter, humiliation had once seemed like the end. But in truth, it was only the beginning of a new dawn, where love, dignity, and hope would guide her every step. So that's how the story ends, my wonderful friends. And if you're still here with me right now, it means something in Alina's journey has touched your heart in its own way. Life is full of betrayal, pain, and moments when we feel humiliated or broken. But just like the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Elena's strength wasn't about money or revenge. It was about holding on to dignity, truth, and love for her child. And maybe that's what we all need to remember. No matter how dark life gets, we still have the power to rise, to heal, and to begin again. So, my dear friends, if this story gave you hope or reminded you of your own strength, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, like this video, and make sure you subscribe to our channel, because together, we'll keep telling stories that don't just entertain, but remind us how powerful the human spirit truly is. And maybe, just maybe, The next story will be the one that helps you heal too. The courtroom was packed. Every seat taken, cameras flashing like 1,000 lightning bolts. Reporters whispered, their pens scratching across notepads, eager to capture the scandal that had become the city's obsession. At the center of it all stood Elena Carter, 6 months pregnant, her hands protectively resting on her swollen belly. Her face was pale but steady, a woman bracing for impact. Across the aisle sat Adrian Carter, her billionaire husband, dressed in a tailored navy suit and smirking as though the entire proceeding was nothing more than a game he had already won. The judge cleared her throat, silence sweeping across the room. But Adrian didn't wait for her to speak. He rose, buttoned his jacket, and looked around like a king addressing his subjects. "Your Honor," he said loudly, his voice dripping with arrogance, "I refuse to support this woman and her unborn child. That baby is not mine. She has disgraced me, my company, and my name." His words landed like daggers, sharp enough to draw invisible blood. Gasps echoed through the room. Helena's knees trembled, but she refused to bow her head. The humiliation was unbearable. The cameras zoomed in, catching every tear she tried to hold back. To the world, it looked like Adrian had stripped her of all dignity, branding her as unfaithful. Investors watching live feeds began to whisper. Board members exchanged wary glances, and the mistress, seated proudly behind Adrian, smirked, certain she had won. Elena gripped the wooden railing in front of her, her fingernails digging into the polished surface. Her lips trembled, but her eyes burned with something stronger than shame, resolve. She knew what was about to come. She knew the truth would not only clear her name, but also shatter the empire Adrian had built on lies. All it would take was a single sheet of paper, a DNA test result hidden until this very moment. And when it came out, nothing in Adrian Carter's world would ever be the same again. Because in the next seconds, his empire would begin to crumble. Before the cameras, before the humiliation, Elena Carter was simply a woman who dreamed of a quiet, ordinary life. She had never asked for diamonds, luxury yachts, or champagne-soaked parties. What she wanted was love, safety, and a family. Born in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago, Elena grew up with hardworking parents who taught her values of kindness and resilience. Her father worked long hours as a mechanic, her mother juggled jobs in a diner and a dry cleaner's shop. They didn't have much, but what they gave her was priceless, a belief that love was stronger than money. Elena carried that belief into adulthood. At 24, she was working as an elementary school teacher, adored by her students for her warmth and patience. She had little savings, but her heart was rich with hope. When she met Adrian Carter at a charity auction where she volunteered, she thought fate had handed her a miracle. Adrian was older, polished, powerful, and unlike anyone she had ever known. He swept her off her feet with lavish gestures and promises of forever. For the first time in her life, she felt chosen. Their wedding was a spectacle. Elena's modest relatives sat stunned in a ballroom, filled with chandeliers and crystal glasses, unable to believe their daughter had married one of the most powerful men in the country. But beneath the glamour, Elena remained the same girl she had always been. She still made her own coffee in the mornings, still visited her students with handmade gifts, still wrote letters to her parents every week. She believed she could balance his world of power with her world of love. When she discovered she was pregnant, her heart soared. She imagined decorating a nursery, singing lullabies, teaching her child the same values her parents had taught her. Adrian's reaction had been strange, smiles too wide, hugs too quick, but she ignored the nagging doubt. She wanted to believe in the dream. She wanted to believe in him. But as her belly grew, Adrian's warmth grew cold. He became distant, spending nights in hotels, claiming urgent business. Whispers of another woman reached her ears, but she dismissed them, clinging to hope. Even when he stopped holding her hand in public, even when his eyes slid past her like she was invisible, she convinced herself it was stress, not betrayal. By the time the trial arrived, Elena was no longer naive. She was exhausted, heartbroken, but not broken. Carrying her unborn child, she stood in that courtroom with dignity, even as Adrian called her names. She had something he did not. Truth. And truth, she knew, could destroy even the mightiest empire. What Adrian didn't know was that Elena was ready for this fight, and the evidence she carried would leave the world speechless. The courtroom wasn't just a place of justice that day. It was a stage where reputations were built or destroyed. The New York County Supreme Court stood tall, its stone columns casting long shadows on the icy streets below. Outside, reporters swarmed like vultures, cameras flashing as soon as Adrian's black limousine pulled up. His mistress, perfectly styled in a crimson dress, stepped out beside him, her smug smile designed for the front pages of tomorrow's tabloids. To the world, Adrian Carter appeared untouchable, the billionaire who could bend both markets and people to his will. Inside, however, the air felt heavier. Rows of polished oak benches were filled with spectators, investors, business rivals, journalists, and curious onlookers eager to witness the downfall of a man or the destruction of a woman. The chandeliers overhead glittered coldly, reflecting the tension that made every cough and whisper sound like thunder. The judge's bench loomed high, a reminder that in this room titles and fortunes meant nothing. Only the truth mattered, or so it was supposed to. Elena entered quietly, wearing a simple navy dress that clung to her swollen belly. She looked out of place against the expensive suits and designer gowns that crowded the courtroom, yet her presence carried an undeniable grace. She walked slowly, her hands steady on the railing, every step a silent act of defiance. Her allies were few. Her lawyer Lucas Hale seated firmly at her side, and a handful of reporters who still believed in exposing truth over selling scandal. Adrian, in contrast, dominated the room with his arrogance. He leaned back in his chair, whispering to his attorney and exchanging glances with his mistress, as if this trial were a performance for his amusement. He treated Elena like a nuisance, a distraction to be discarded, not the woman who had once shared his home and carried his child. The atmosphere shifted when the judge entered. "All rise," the bailiff commanded, and the room fell into silence. The trial had begun, but it already felt more like theater than justice. Every word would be quoted, every gesture dissected, every photograph splashed across the morning headlines. This was not just a legal battle, it was a public execution of character. Elena knew it. Her humiliation had been orchestrated to destroy her dignity. Adrian's wealth ensured the press was on his side, ready to paint her as a liar. Yet beneath her calm exterior, her heart raced with one thought. She carried a truth so powerful it could turn this entire courtroom into Adrian's worst nightmare. Because within these very walls, his empire wasn't going to be celebrated. It was going to collapse. Adrian Carter wasn't always a billionaire with the world at his feet. He began as a clever, ambitious young man from an average family, determined to escape obscurity. Ruthless in business, charming in public, and merciless in private, Adrian built his empire, brick by brick. He took risks others feared, crushed competitors without hesitation, and bought loyalty with money and influence. By the time he turned 38, Adrian had transformed Carter Enterprises into a real estate empire spanning cities and continents. Magazines praised him as a visionary. Talk shows invited him to boast about his success. But behind that polished image was a man who believed love was weakness and loyalty was a tool. To Elena, he had once seemed like a dream. He wooed her with expensive dinners, handwritten notes, and promises of security. But the man who whispered forever at their wedding was not the same man who now sat in court smirking beside his mistress. Adrian had changed, or perhaps, Elena thought bitterly, he had always been this way, only better at hiding it. His arrogance had no limits. To him, women were ornaments. Elena had served her purpose as the wife who elevated his image, the gentle schoolteacher who made him look grounded, approachable, even human. But once her pregnancy became real, once her needs conflicted with his desires, he began to see her as a burden. He showered his mistress with gifts while criticizing Elena for draining his energy. The mistress, Cassandra, was the perfect reflection of Adrian's vanity. Young, striking, ambitious, she played her role flawlessly. He flaunted her at events, introduced her to investors, and whispered lies about Elena's instability to justify his betrayal. Cassandra fed his ego, laughing at every joke, assuring him he deserved more than a small-town wife. And Adrian believed her, because it suited his narrative. He was a king, entitled to whatever pleased him. But arrogance breeds blindness. Adrian underestimated Elena. He thought she was weak, too naive to fight back. In his mind, this trial was already won. He would smear her reputation, deny the child, and walk away unscathed, his mistress on his arm, his empire untouched. He didn't know that the very thing he dismissed, the truth, was waiting like a dagger behind velvet curtains. That morning, when Adrian told Cassandra, "By tonight, she'll be nothing more than a forgotten name," he meant every word. His downfall, however, had already begun. And the cruelest irony was this: Adrian Carter had no idea the woman he tried to crush was about to destroy him instead.